First things first, let's address the elephant in the room, and that is the fact that I'm back. If you've been watching me for longer than, well, this video being your first, then you would know that I've been gone for a while. I think it's been around 2.5 months since my last upload, and first off, I would like to sincerely apologize. And secondly, I would like to sort of explain where I've been before we get on to the contents of this video. The TLDR is that I've been traveling abroad, or I've been abroad, not necessarily traveling, but I was visiting visiting family. I think I left the day after I graduated, and that was in like May, so I've been in a different country for like 2 months, and then I came back around 3 weeks ago. But the reason I haven't recorded until now, or haven't uploaded until now, is because I have been working, trying to make a little bit of money before I head off to college. So yeah, I did try to record videos, believe me, I did, while abroad, but there were just nothing ever seemed to work out, because I think I managed to get 2 videos, but I rewatched, or I was editing both, and one of them, it was just non-stop construction sounds from outside, and both of them I did not have a microphone, so that was another thing. But one was construction, and the other was the fact that my little cousin kept coming into the room, because we had around 10 people in the house at one point, and it was not a good idea, and I should have known better than to film, or try to film, a 25 to 30 minute ASMR video. So yeah, that's kind of what's been up. But good news is I am back, and I will be back for a while. I don't leave for school until like almost a month later. My school is on my college, university is on the quarter system. Not the semester one. So instead of having a fall semester and a spring semester, we instead have 3 quarters. We take classes. So we start mid to late September-ish. Even while I'm in college, I do still plan to upload ASMR, maybe less frequent, but for now, I'm going to try for two videos a week. I'm very, very happy to see you guys again. So happy to see you guys again. And I promise I will not leave unannounced. I promise I won't leave unannounced anytime soon. Yeah. Now, let's get on with the main subject of the video today. I'm so excited because I'm going to be reading. Yes, I'm going to be reading again. This book, which has been in my TBR for God knows how long. I've had it for like 3 years now, but it's been in my TBR for longer. It is, if you couldn't see already, Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. This is not my first Dostoevsky book. I read White Nights like a month ago. That one was very somber, romantic, hopeless, unrequited love. This is definitely not touching on those topics, or I presume it's going to be a lot different. his famous works include Crime and Punishment, The Brothers Karamazov, The Idiot, Demons, Notes from Underground, which I also have, and I think this one is his most famous work, but I think his magnum opus is The Brothers Karamazov, I believe. I have that one as well, but I obviously have not gone to reading that one. This is going to be the Barnes & Noble Classics edition, translated by Constance Garnett, which I heard is a little bit iffy when it comes to Dostoevsky translations. His works touch on topics such as morality, faith, as in religion, I guess, love, death, family, I guess interpersonal relations, so those types of things. Very philosophical. Why did I say it like that? Very philosophical, and I'm not going to be starting in the beginning of the book. I'm not that far in, as you can see, but I'll be starting off where I left off from last reading this. It is chapter 7, I believe, and it's going to be the chapter where Raskolnikov, if you are familiar with this book, Raskolnikov is, or unfamiliar, Raskolnikov is the main character, and he is about to go meet the pawnbroker with the intention of murdering her. I'm gonna read the back snippet for you guys so you can kind of get an idea of what the plot of the book is. Few authors have been as personally familiar with desperation as Fyodor Dostoevsky, and none have been so adept at describing it. Crime and Punishment, the novel that heralded the author's period of masterworks, tells the story of the poor and talented student Raskolnikov, a character of unparalleled psychological depth and complexity. Raskolnikov reasons that men like himself, by virtue of their intellectual superiority, can and must transcend societal law. To test his theory, he devises the perfect crime, the murder of a spiteful pawnbroker living in St. Petersburg. Raskolnikov soon realizes the folly of his abstractions. Haunted by vivid hallucinations and the torments of his conscience, he seeks relief from his terror and moral isolation, first in Sonia, the pious streetwalker who urges him to confess, then in a tense game of cat and mouse with Porfiry, the brilliant magistrate assigned to the murder investigation. One of the most gripping crime stories of all time, Crime and Punishment delineates the theories and motivations that underlie a bankrupt morality. Chapter 7. The door was as before opened a tiny crack, and again two sharp and suspicious eyes stared at him out of the darkness. Then Raskolnikov lost his head and nearly made a great mistake. Fearing the old woman would be frightened by their being alone, and not hoping that the sight of him would disarm her suspicions, he took hold of the door and pulled it towards him to prevent the old woman from attempting to shut it again. Seeing this, she did not pull the door back, but she did not let go of the handle either, so that he almost dragged her out with it onto the stairs. Seeing that she was standing in the doorway, not allowing him to pass, he advanced straight upon her. She stepped back in alarm, trying to say something, but seemed unable, and stared with open eyes at him. "Good evening, Alyona Ivanovna," he began, trying to speak as casually as possible, but his voice would not obey him. It broke and shook. I have brought something, but we'd better go over here to the light." And leaving her, he walked straight into the room uninvited. The old woman ran after him. Her tongue was loosened. "Good heavens, what are you doing here? Who are you? What do you want?" "Why, Alyona Ivanovna, you know me, Raskolnikov. Here, I brought you the pledge I promised the other day." And he held out the pledge. The old woman glanced for a moment at the pledge, but at once stared in the eyes of her uninvited visitor. She looked intently, maliciously, and mistrustfully. A minute passed. He even thought he saw something like a sneer in her eyes, as though she had already guessed everything. He felt that he was losing his head, and he was almost frightened, so frightened that if she were to look like that and not say a word for another half-minute, he would have run away from her. "Why do you look at me as though you didn't recognize me?" he said suddenly, also with malice. "Take it if you like it. If not, I'll go somewhere else. I am in a hurry." He had not even thought of saying this. It was just suddenly said of itself. The old woman recovered herself, and her visitor's resolute tone evidently set her at ease. "But why, sir, all of a sudden? What is it?" visit, she asked once more, scanning Raskolnikov intently and weighing the pledge in her hand. A thing, cigarette case, silver. Look at it. Does not seem somehow like silver. How he has wrapped it up. Trying to untie the string and turning to the window, to the light. All of her windows were shut. In spite of the stifling heat, she left him altogether for several seconds and stood with her back to him. He unbuttoned his coat and freed the axe from the noose, but did not yet take it out altogether, simply holding it in his right hand under the coat. His hands were terribly weak. He himself felt them every moment growing more numb and more wooden. He was afraid he would let the axe slip and fall. Suddenly his head seemed to spin. "What has he tied it up like this for?" the old woman cried with vexation and moved toward him. He had not an instant more to lose. He pulled the axe out completely, swung it with both arms, scarcely conscious of himself, and without effort, almost mechanically, brought the blunt side down on her head. He seemed not to use his own strength in this, but as soon as he had once brought the axe down, strength was born in him. The old woman was as always bareheaded. Her thin, light hair, streaked with gray, thickly smeared with grease, was plaited in a rat's tail and fastened by a broken horn comb, which stood out on the nape of her neck. As she was so short, the blow fell on the very top of her skull. She cried out, but very faintly, and suddenly sank all of a heap on the floor, though still managing to raise her hands to her head in one hand as she still held the pledge. Then, with all his strength, he dealt her another and another blow with the blunt side, and on the same spot. The blood gushed as from an overturned glass. The body fell back. He stepped back, let it fall, and at once bent over her face. She was already dead. Her eyes seemed to be starting out of their sockets. The forehead and the whole face were drawn and contorted convulsively. He laid the axe on the ground near the dead body and felt at once in her pocket, trying not to get smeared with the streaming blood. The same right-hand pocket from which he had taken the key on his last visit. He was in full possession of his faculties, free from confusion or giddiness, but his hands were still trembling. He remembered afterwards that he had been particularly cautious and careful, trying all the same not to get stained. He pulled out the keys at once. They were all as before in one bunch on a steel ring. He ran at once into the bedroom with them. It was a very small room with a whole shrine of holy images. Against the other wall stood a big bed, very clean and covered with a silk patchwork wadded quilt. Against a third wall was a chest of drawers. Strange to say, as soon as he began to fit the keys into the chest, as soon as he heard their jingling, a convulsive shudder passed over him. He suddenly felt tempted again to give it all up and go away, but that was only for an instant. It was too late to go back. He even smiled at himself when suddenly another alarming idea occurred in his mind. He suddenly fancied that the old woman might still be alive and might recover her senses. Leaving the keys in the chest, he ran back to the body, he snatched up the axe and lifted it once more over the old woman, but did not bring it down. There was no doubt that she was dead. Bending down and examining her again more closely, he saw clearly that the skull was broken and even battered in on one side. He was about to feel it with his finger, but drew back his hand, and indeed it was evident without that. Meanwhile, there was a hole full of blood. All of a sudden, he noticed a string on her neck. He tugged at it, but the string was strong and did not snap, and besides, it was soaked with blood. He tried to pull it out from the front of the dress, but something held it and prevented its coming. In its impatience, he raised the axe again to hack at the string from above, right on the body, but did not dare. And with difficulty, smearing his hands and the axe in the blood, after 2 minutes' hurried effort, he had cut the string and took it off without touching the body with the axe. He was not mistaken. It was a purse. On the string were 2 crosses, one of cypress wood and one of copper, and an enameled icon, and with them a small, greasy, suede purse with a steel rim and a ring. The purse was stuffed very full. Raskolnikov thrust it in his pocket without looking at it, flung the crosses on the old woman's chest, and rushed back into the bedroom, this time taking the axe with him. He was in a terrible hurry. He snatched the keys and began trying them again, but he was unsuccessful. They would not fit in the keys. It was not so much that his hands were shaking, but that he kept making mistakes, though he saw, for instance, that a key was not the right one and would not fit. Still, he tried to put it in. Suddenly he remembered and realized that the big key with the deep notches, which was hanging there with the small keys, could not possibly belong to the chest of drawers. On his last visit, this had struck him, but to some strong box, and that everything perhaps was hidden in that box, he abandoned the chest of drawers and at once felt under the bedstead, knowing that the old woman usually keeps boxes under their beds, and so it was. There was a good-sized box under the bed, at least a yard in length, and an arched lid covered with red leather and studded with steel nails. The notched key fit at once and unlocked it. At the top, under a white sheet, was a coat of thick red silk cloth cloth lined with hareskin. Under it was a silk dress, then a shawl, and it seemed as though there was nothing below but clothes. The first thing he did was to wipe his blood-stained hands on the thick red silk. It's red, and on red blood will be less noticeable. The thought passed through his head. Then he suddenly came to. Good God, am I going out of my mind? He thought with terror. But no sooner did he touch the clothes than a gold watch slipped from under the furred coat. He started turning everything over, and in fact there were various articles made of gold among the clothes, probably all pledges, unredeemed or waiting to be redeemed, bracelets, chains, earrings, pins, and such. Some were in cases, others simply wrapped in newspaper, carefully and exactly folded. Double sheets and tied round with tape. Losing not a moment, he began stuffing the pockets of his trousers and overcoat without examining or opening the parcels and cases. But he didn't get to take many. He suddenly heard steps in the room where the old woman lay. He stopped short and was still as death, but all was quiet, so he must have been imagining things. All of a sudden he distinctly heard a faint cry, as though someone had uttered a low, broken moan. Then again, dead silence for a minute or two. He sat squatting on his heels by the box and waited, holding his breath, and then suddenly jumped, seized the axe, and ran out of the bedroom. In the middle of the room stood Elisaveta, with a big bundle in her arms. She was gazing in stupefaction at her murdered sister, white as a sheet, and seeming not to have the strength to cry out. Seeing him run out of the bedroom, she began faintly quivering all over like a leaf. A shudder ran down her face. She lifted her hand, opened her mouth, but still did not scream. She began slowly backing away from him into the corner, staring intently, persistently at him, but still uttered no sound, as though she could not get breath to scream. He rushed at her with the axe. Her mouth twitched piteously as one sees babies' mouths when they begin to be frightened, stare intently at what frightens them, and are on the point of screaming. This hapless Elisaveta was so simple, and had been so thoroughly scared and browbeaten that she did not even raise a hand to protect her face, though that was the most necessary and natural action at the moment, for the axe was raised over her face. She only lifted her empty left hand ever so slightly, still far from the face, slowly holding it out before her as though motioning him away. The axe fell with a sharp edge just on the skull and split at one blow all the top of the head. She collapsed at once. Raskolnikov, completely lost control of himself, snatched up her bundle, dropped it again, and ran into the entryway. Fear gained more and more mastery over him, especially after this second, quite unexpected murder. He longed to run away from the place as fast as possible, and if at that moment he had been capable of seeing and reasoning more correctly, if he had been able to realize all the difficulties of his position, the hopelessness, the hideousness, and the absurdity of it, if he could have understood how many obstacles and perhaps villainies he had still to overcome or to commit to get out of that place and to make his way home, it is very possible that he would have abandoned everything and would have gone to give himself up, and not from fear of himself, but from simple horror and loathing of what he had done. The feeling loathing especially surged up within him and grew stronger every minute. Not for anything in the world would he have gone to the strong box or even into the room, but a sort of blankness, even dreaminess, had begun by degrees to take possession of him. In moments he forgot himself, or rather forgot what was of importance, and caught at trifles. Glancing, however, into the kitchen and seeing a bucket half full of water on a bench, he did realize that he needed to wash his hands with the axe. His hands were sticky with blood. He dropped the axe with the blade in the water, snatched a piece of soap that lay in a broken saucer on the window, and began washing his hands right there in the bucket. When they were clean, he took out the axe, washed the blade, and spent a long time, about 3 minutes, washing the wood where there were spots of blood, even rubbing them with soap. Then he wiped it all with some linen that was hanging to dry on a line in the kitchen, and then he spent a long time attentively examining the axe at the window. There was no trace left on it, only the wood was still damp. He carefully hung the axe in the noose under his coat. Then, as far as was possible, in the dim light in the kitchen, he looked over his overcoat, his trousers, and his boots. At the first glance, there seemed to be nothing but stains on the boots. He wetted the rag and rubbed the boots, but he knew he was not looking thoroughly. There might be something quite noticeable that he was overlooking. He stood in the middle of the room, lost in thought. A dark, agonizing thought rose in his mind. The thought that he was going mad, and that at that moment he was incapable of reasoning, of protecting himself, that he ought perhaps to be doing something utterly different from what he was doing now. Good God, he muttered, I must run, and he rushed into the entryway. But here was a shock of terror awaited him as he had never of course known before. He stood and gazed and could not believe his eyes. The outer doors from the stairs, the ones at which he had not long before waited and rung, was standing unlocked and at least 6 inches open. No lock, no bolt, all that time. The old woman had not shut it after him, perhaps as a precaution, but good God, why? He had seen Elisaveta afterwards words, and how could he have failed to reflect that she must have come in somehow? She could not have come through the wall. He dashed to the door and fastened the latch. But no, the wrong thing again. I must get away. Get away. He unfastened the latch, opened the door, and began listening on the staircase. He listened a long time. Some were far away, probably in a gateway. Two voices were loudly and shrilly shouting, quarreling, and scolding. What are they yelling about? He waited patiently. At last everything was still, as though suddenly cut off. They had separated. He was meaning to go out. But suddenly on the floor below, a door was noisily opened, and someone began going downstairs, humming a tune. How is it they all make such a noise? Flashed through his mind. Once more he closed the door and waited. At last everything was still. Not a soul was stirring. He was just taking a step towards the stairs when he heard fresh footsteps. The steps sounded very far off at the very bottom of the stairs, but he remembered quite clearly and distinctly that from the first sound he began, for some reason, to suspect that this was someone coming there to the fourth floor to the old woman. Why? Were the sounds somehow peculiar and significant? The steps were heavy, even and unhurried. Now he had passed the first floor. Now he was mounting higher. It was growing more and more distinct. He could hear his heavy breathing, and now the third story had been reached, coming here, and it seemed to him all at once that he was turned to stone, that it was like a dream in which one is being pursued. Nearly caught, and will be killed, and is rooted to the spot and cannot even move one's arms. At last, when the unknown was mounting to the fourth floor, he suddenly started, and succeeded in slipping nearly inquietly back into the flat and closing the door behind him. Then he took the hook and softly, noiselessly fixed it in the catch. Instinct helped him. When he had done this, he crouched, holding his breath by the door. The unknown visitor was by now also at the door. They were now standing opposite one another, as he had just been standing with the old woman when the door divided them, and he was listening. The visitor panted several times. He must be a big, fat man, thought Raskolnikov, squeezing the axe in his hand. It seemed like a dream. The visitor took hold of the bell and rang loudly. As soon as the tin bell tinkled, Raskolnikov seemed to be aware of something moving in the room. For some seconds he listened quite seriously. The unknown rang again, waited, and suddenly tugged violently and impatiently at the handle of the door. Raskolnikov gazed in horror as the hook, shaking in its fastening, and in blank terror expected every minute that the fastening would be pulled down. It certainly did seem possible, so violently was he shaking it. He was tempted to hold the fastening, but he might be aware of it. Dizziness came over him again. I shall fall down, flashed through his mind, but the unknown began to speak, and he recovered himself at once. What's up? Are they asleep or murdered? To damn then, he bawled in a thick voice. Hey, Alyona Ivanovna, old witch, Lizaveta Ivanovna, hey, my beauty, open the door, damn them. Are they asleep or what? And again, enraged, he tugged with all his might 12 times at the bell. He must certainly be a man of authority and an intimate acquaintance. At this moment, light hurried steps were heard not far off. On the stairs, someone else was approaching. Raskolnikov had not heard them at first. You don't say there's no one at home, the newcomer cried in a cheerful, ringing voice, addressing the first visitor, who still went on pulling the bell. Good evening, coach. From his voice, he must be quite young, thought Raskolnikov. Who the hell can tell? I've almost broken the lock, answered Coach, but how do you come to know me? Why, the day before yesterday I beat you 3 times in a row at billiards at Gambrinus. Oh, so they are not at home. That's strange. It's pretty stupid, though. Where could that old woman have gone? I've come on business. Yes, and I have business with her, too. Well, what can we do? Go back, I supposed. And I was hoping to get some money, cried the young man. We must give up, of course, but what did she fix this time for? The old witch fixed the time for me to come herself. It's out of my way. And where the devil she can have gone to, I can't make out. She sits here from year's end to year's end, the old hag. Her legs are bad, and yet here all of a sudden she's out for a walk. Hadn't we better ask the porter what, where she's gone, and when she'll be back? Damn it all. We might ask, but you know she never goes anywhere. And he once more tugged at the door handle. Damn it all, there's nothing to be done. We must go. Stay, cried the young man suddenly. Do you see how the door shakes if you pull it? Well, that shows it's not locked, but fastened with a hook. Do you hear how the hook clanks? Well, why don't you see? That proves that one of them is at home. If they were all out, they would have locked the door from the outside with the key and not with the hook from the inside. There, do you hear how the hook is clanking? To fasten the hook on the inside, they must be at home, don't you see? So there they are, sitting inside and aren't opening the door. Well, and so they must be, cried Coach, astonished. What are they doing in there? And he began furiously shaking the door. Stay, cried the young man again. Don't pull at it. There must be something wrong. Here, you've been ringing and pulling at the door, and they still don't open. So suddenly in an impatience, deserting his sentry duty, he too went down, hurrying and thumping his heavy boots on the stairs. The steps died away. God, what should I do? Raskolnikov unfastened the hook, opened the door. There was no sound. Abruptly, without any thought at all, he went out, closing the door as thoroughly as he could, and went downstairs. He had gone down 3 flights when he suddenly heard a loud voice below. Where could he go? There was nowhere to hide. He was just going back to the flat. Hey there, catch the brute! Somebody dashed out of a flat below, shouting. It rather fell, then ran down the stairs, bawling at the top of his voice. Mitka, 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 Mitka! Damn him! The shout ended in a shriek. The last sounds came from the yard. All was still. But at the same instant, several men talking loud and fast began noisily mounting the stairs. There were 3 or 4 of them. He distinguished the ringing voice of the young man. Then, filled with despair, he ran straight to meet them, feeling, come what may, if they stopped him, all was lost. If they let him pass, all was lost too. They would remember him. They were approaching. There was only a flight away from him, and suddenly, salvation! A few steps from him on the right, there was an empty flat with the door wide open. The flat on the second floor where the painters had been at work, and which, as though for his benefit, they had just left. It was they, no doubt, who had just run down shouting. The floor had only just been painted. In the middle of the room stood a pail and a broken pot with paints and brushes. One instant he had whisked in at the open door, and suddenly behind the wall, and just in the nick of time, they had already reached the landing. Then they turned and went on up to the 4th floor, talking loudly, waited, went on tiptoe, and ran down the stairs. No one was on the stairs or in the gateway. He passed quickly through the gateway and turned to the left onto the street. He knew perfectly well that at that moment they were at the flat, and that they were greatly astonished at finding it unlocked, as the door had just been fastened, that by now they were looking at the bodies, that before another minute had passed they would guess and eventually realize that the murderer had just been there, and had succeeded in hiding somewhere, slipping by them and escaping. They would guess most likely that he had been in an empty flat while they were going upstairs, and meanwhile he dared not spend too much time. Speed up too much, though the next turning was still nearly 100 yards away. Should he slip through some gateway and wait somewhere in an unknown street? No, hopeless. Should he fling away the axe? Should he take a cab? Hopeless, hopeless. At last he reached the turning. He turned down it, more dead than alive. Here he was halfway to safety, and here he understood it. It was less risky because there was a great crowd of people, and he was lost in it like a grain of sand, but everything he had suffered had so weakened him that he could scarcely move. Perspiration ran down him in drops. His neck was all wet. My God, he's been at it, someone shouted at him when he came out on the canal bank. He was only dimly conscious of himself now. The farther he went, the worse it was. He remembered, however, that when he came out onto the canal bank, he was alarmed at finding few people there, and at being more conspicuous, and he had thought of turning back. Though he was almost falling from fatigue, he went a long way round so as to get home from a different direction. He was not fully conscious when he passed through the gateway of his house. He was already on the staircase before he remembered the axe, and he had a very grave problem before him, to put it back and to escape observation as far as possible. In doing so, he was of course incapable of reflecting that it might perhaps be far better not to put the axe back at all, but to drop it later on in somebody's yard. But it all turned out beautifully. The door of the porter's room was closed but not locked, so it seemed most likely that the porter was at home, but he had lost his powers of reflection so completely that he walked straight to the door and opened it. If the porter had asked him, "What do you want?" he would perhaps have simply handed him the axe, but again the porter was not at home. He succeeded in putting the axe back under the bench, and even covering it with a chunk of wood just as before. He met no one, not a soul, on the way to his room. The landlady's door was shut. When he was in his room, he flung himself on the sofa just as he was. He did not sleep, but sank into blank forgetfulness. If anyone had come into his room then, he would have jumped up at once and screamed. Scraps and shreds of thoughts were simply swarming in his brain, but he could not catch one. He could not rest on one, and in spite of all his efforts, So yeah, I think that was quite an interesting chapter, to say the least. That was the first part of the book. Now, on part 2. So I guess it's split into parts by the plot line, as a lot of books are. So the first part is, I guess, development up to him committing the act of murder, and then onwards is probably him escaping, getting caught, and then after he gets caught, I'm assuming. I haven't read it. Please don't spoil it for me if you have. But yeah, it's so interesting. I hope you guys enjoyed this video.